What if I told you that one American warship completed one of the most important secret missions of World War II, only to become the victim of one of the greatest naval disasters in US history? A disaster so horrifying that hundreds of sailors would spend nearly 5 days drifting helplessly in the open Pacific Ocean, surrounded by hunger, thirst, exhaustion, and one of the ocean's most feared predators. For decades, the story of the USS Indianapolis remained overshadowed by the final days of World War II. Yet the courage, suffering, and sacrifice of its crew continue to stand as one of the most unforgettable survival stories ever recorded. This is the story of the USS Indianapolis. July 1945 world. War II was entering its final chapter. Across the Pacific, Allied forces had pushed Japan back island by island. Fierce battles had already claimed countless lives, but American military leaders were preparing for an operation they believed could end the war once and for all. That operation depended on a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen, the atomic bomb deep inside heavily guarded laboratories. Scientists had spent years developing this revolutionary weapon under the Manhattan Project. Every detail was surrounded by extraordinary secrecy. Very few people knew what was being built. Even fewer knew how it would be delivered to transport the bomb's most critical components safely across the Pacific. The U.S. Navy selected one of its fastest and most trusted heavy cruisers. The USS Indianapolis. Commissioned in 1932, the Indianapolis had already earned an impressive combat record. She had served throughout the Pacific campaign, survived enemy attacks, bombarded Japanese positions, and carried some of the Navy's most experienced sailors. Her captain was Charles B. McVay III, a respected naval officer trusted with difficult assignments. In July 1945, Captain McVay received orders unlike any he had ever received before. The mission was classified. The destination was secret. Even many members of the crew had no idea what they were carrying. Armed guards protected the mysterious cargo around the clock. Questions were discouraged. Curiosity was dangerous. On July 16, 1945, the USS Indianapolis departed San Francisco, carrying components essential to the atomic bomb that would later be dropped on Hiroshima. Speed was everything. The cruiser crossed the Pacific at remarkable pace, making almost no stops along the way. Every hour mattered. Enemy submarines were still operating in the Pacific, and no one could risk delaying the mission. Against all odds, the Indianapolis completed the journey successfully. The classified cargo was delivered safely to the American military base on Tinian Island in the Mariana Islands. The mission had been a complete success. Few people aboard realized they had just helped deliver one of the most significant weapons in human history. With its secret assignment complete, the USS Indianapolis received new orders. The cruiser would sail west toward the Philippines to prepare for further military operations. It sounded like a routine voyage. The crew finally had a chance to relax. Many believed the most dangerous part of their mission was already behind them. The sea appeared calm. The weather was clear. The war itself seemed to be approaching its end. But hundreds of miles away, beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, a Japanese submarine was quietly hunting. Its commander had no idea he was about to encounter the very ship that had delivered history's most secret cargo. Within hours, everything would change forever. July 30th, 1945, the USS Indianapolis was sailing alone across the Philippine Sea, heading toward later in the Philippines. After successfully completing its secret mission, the ocean was calm. The sky was clear. Most of the crew believed the voyage would be uneventful. Some sailors were writing letters home. Others played cards, talked with friends, or tried to get a few hours of sleep. No one imagined that beneath the peaceful surface of the Pacific, danger was silently following them. Nearly 40 feet below the waves, the Japanese submarine I-58, commanded by Captain Mochitsura Hashimoto, was patrolling the area. Through his periscope, Hashimoto spotted a large American warship moving across the horizon. He immediately realized it was an important target. Silently, the submarine changed course and began closing the distance. Inside the USS Indianapolis, nothing seemed unusual. The engines continued their steady rhythm. Crew members carried out their normal duties. Many had no idea that enemy eyes were already locked onto their ship. Just after midnight, everything changed. From the darkness beneath the sea, the I-58 fired a spread of torpedoes. Seconds later, a massive explosion ripped through the starboard side of the USS Indianapolis. The entire ship shook violently. Flames erupted into the night. Sky steel plates twisted apart. Electrical systems failed almost instantly, plunging much of the ship into darkness. Before the crew could fully understand what had happened, a second torpedo struck. This explosion was even more devastating, tore into fuel tanks and critical engineering compartments. Boiling fuel spread rapidly through the lower decks. Thick black smoke filled passageways. Water rushed into the ship at an incredible speed. Captain Charles McVay rushed onto the bridge. Within moments, he realized the terrible truth. The damage was catastrophic. The Indianapolis could not be saved. He immediately ordered the crew to abandon ship. Sailors scrambled through smoke-filled corridors, trying to reach the deck. Some helped injured shipmates. Others searched desperately for life jackets. Many never made it out. The ship began listing heavily to one side. Every minute, more seawater poured inside. Those who reached the deck jumped into the dark Pacific below. Some leaped from heights of nearly 60 feet, hoping to avoid the burning oil spreading across the water. Others were forced to jump through flames. Within only about 12 minutes of the torpedo attack, one of the U.S. Navy's proudest heavy cruisers disappeared beneath the Pacific Ocean. The bows slipped under. First, the stern rose high into the air. Then, with a deafening roar of collapsing steel, the USS Indianapolis vanished beneath the waves. Forever. Nearly 300 sailors went down with the ship. Around 900 others were suddenly left floating in the open ocean. They had little food, almost no fresh water, very few life rafts, and no one knew they were missing. The survivors gathered together in small groups, hoping rescue ships would arrive within hours. Some encouraged one another, others prayed quietly. Many believed help was already on its way. They couldn't have been more wrong. Unknown to them, no distress call had successfully reached naval headquarters. No rescue mission had been launched. No aircraft was searching the area. The Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction as the first light of dawn appeared over the horizon. The exhausted survivors looked around at the endless ocean. What they saw was terrifying. This wasn't the beginning of their rescue. It was only the beginning of their nightmare. When the sun rose over the Pacific on the morning of July 30th, 1945, nearly 900 survivors of the USS Indianapolis were still alive. They floated in small groups, scattered across miles of open ocean. Some wore life jackets, others clung to floating debris torn from the ship during its final moments. Everyone believed rescue ships would arrive before sunset. After all, surely the Navy knew the Indianapolis had failed to arrive at its destination. Surely someone would come looking. But hour after hour passed, and no one came. The tropical sun quickly became their first enemy. Without shade, the heat was relentless. Salt water soaked their clothes and burned their skin. Their lips cracked. Their throats became painfully dry. The few emergency rations that had survived the sinking disappeared almost immediately. Fresh drinking water was nearly non-existent. As the first day turned into the second, exhaustion began taking its toll. Some sailors drifted into sleep, only to wake coughing after swallowing seawater. Others struggled to keep injured shipmates afloat. The men tried to stay together, believing larger groups would be easier for rescue aircraft to spot. They encouraged one another. They shared stories about home. They spoke about their families. Many promised that once they were rescued, they would never take another ordinary day for granted. But beneath the surface of the Pacific, something had already noticed them. Sharks. At first, only a few dark fins circled the floating sailors. The men tried to remain calm. Some hoped the sharks would simply swim away. Instead, more appeared, oceanic white-tip sharks, drawn by the explosions, fuel, wreckage, and the growing number of struggling survivors, began circling the groups. Every splash seemed to attract another predator. The sailors could do little more than kick at the water or shout in desperation. Then came the first attack. A scream echoed across the ocean. One sailor was suddenly pulled beneath the surface. Moments later, the water turned red. Panic spread instantly. The survivors tightened their groups, hoping safety existed in numbers, but the attacks continued, sometimes during daylight, sometimes in complete darkness. Each disappearance reminded the others that danger surrounded them from every direction. Yet the sharks were only one part of their nightmare. Dehydration became even deadlier. Driven beyond the limits of human endurance, some sailors began drinking seawater, despite repeated warnings not to. Within hours, many became dangerously ill. Hallucinations set in. Some believed they could see ships on the horizon. Others imagined fresh water, friendly islands, or family members waiting nearby. Several removed their life jackets and swam toward imaginary rescue vessels that didn't exist. Their friends shouted for them to come back. Most never returned. By the third and fourth days, the number of survivors continued to shrink. Some died from exhaustion, some from dehydration, others from injuries suffered during the sinking. Many simply slipped silently beneath the waves. Still, those who remained refused to give up. They supported one another whenever they could. They prayed together. They reminded each other that somewhere beyond the endless horizon, someone had to be searching. What they didn't know was that the United States Navy still had no idea that nearly 900 men were stranded in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. For 4 unimaginable days, the survivors waited, and then, on the afternoon of August 2nd, 1945, a single aircraft appeared in the sky. Everything was about to change. On the afternoon of August 2nd, 1945, after nearly 4 days drifting in the open Pacific, the surviving sailors of the USS Indianapolis had almost lost hope. Many could barely keep their heads above the water. Their skin was burned by the relentless sun. Their bodies were weakened by dehydration, hunger, and exhaustion. Around them, the ocean remained endless. Then, something changed. A distant aircraft engine echoed across the sky. At first, several survivors believed it was another hallucination. For days, many had imagined seeing ships and airplanes that never existed, but this time, it was real. A U.S. Navy patrol bomber, flown by Lieutenant Wilbur Chuck Gwynn, was conducting a routine anti-submarine patrol when he noticed something unusual below. The ocean appeared covered with oil. As the aircraft descended for a closer look, the crew saw hundreds of tiny figures scattered across the water. Some waved weakly, others barely moved. The pilots immediately realized they had discovered one of the greatest rescue emergencies of World War II. A distress message was transmitted at once. Many men in the water. Survivors urgently need assistance. Rescue operations began immediately. One of the first to respond was a PBY Catalina flying boat commanded by Lieutenant Commander Adrian Marks. Ignoring standard military procedure and risking the safety of his own aircraft, Marks made a daring decision. He landed directly on the rough Pacific Ocean. It was an extraordinary act of courage. The Catalina was never designed to rescue hundreds of people from open seas. Yet Marks and his crew refused to leave anyone behind. One by one, exhausted sailors were pulled aboard. When every seat became occupied, survivors were tied to the aircraft's wings using parachute cords. Others clung wherever they could. The airplane became overloaded far beyond its normal capacity. Still, the crew continued rescuing more men. As darkness fell, additional Navy destroyers finally arrived. Powerful searchlights swept across the water. Rescue crews pulled survivors aboard throughout the night. Some sailors cried with relief. Others were too weak even to speak. Many simply collapsed onto the decks, unable to believe they were finally safe. Out of approximately 1,196 men who had sailed aboard the USS Indianapolis, only 316 survived. More than 800 sailors had been lost. It remains one of the deadliest naval disasters in United States history. But the tragedy did not end there. In the months that followed, attention turned toward one man, Captain Charles Butler McVay III. Despite completing his secret mission successfully and ordering the crew to abandon ship as quickly as possible, McVay was blamed for the disaster. The US Navy accused him of failing to zigzag the ship, an evasive maneuver intended to reduce the risk of submarine attacks. The decision shocked many officers, even more astonishing. The commander of the Japanese submarine that had sunk the USS Indianapolis, Captain Mochitsura Hashimoto, was called to testify during McVay's court-martial. Hashimoto stated that zigzagging would not have prevented his successful attack. Even so, Captain McVay was found guilty. Although his sentence was later reduced, the emotional burden never left him. For years, families of some lost sailors blamed him personally for the tragedy. The weight of that responsibility became unbearable. In 1968, Charles McVay took his own life. He was 69 years old. Decades later, surviving crew members refused to let his name remain stained by history. They campaigned tirelessly for justice. Historians, naval experts, and even school students helped uncover new evidence showing that multiple communication failures, administrative mistakes, and extraordinary circumstances, not simply one captain's decisions, had contributed to the disaster. In 2000, the United States Congress officially cleared Captain McVay's record. The US Navy later formally exonerated him. Although justice came far too late for McVay himself, it brought a measure of peace to his family and to many surviving crew members. Today, the story of the USS Indianapolis stands as far more than a wartime tragedy. It is a story of extraordinary courage, of unimaginable human endurance, of leadership under impossible circumstances, and of the importance of learning from history, even when those lessons are painful. The men who survived nearly 5 days in shark-infested waters demonstrated a level of resilience that few people could ever imagine. Those who never returned are remembered not only for how they died, but for how bravely they served, more than 80 years later. The USS Indianapolis continues to remind the world that history's greatest tragedies are never just about ships or battles. They are about people, their sacrifice, their courage, and the lessons they leave behind for future generations.